Hey there friends, Andrea Walford here from Make Beautiful Cards. Welcome to the September 2020 exclusive video tutorial for subscribers. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create these cards using Stampin' Up's Stitched Leaves die set and a gradient ink blending technique. So the first thing that we're going to start with is to prepare all the pieces that we need for the foundation of these cards. So I'm starting with an early espresso note card, and these are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. So I started with a 4 1/4 by 11 inch piece, scored it at 5 1/2 inches, and then folded it in half using my bone folder. So this is what I'm going to be working on. Now on top of that, I have layered a piece of designer series paper that is the exact size of the front of my note card. So it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And I cut it out of this wood plank or wood grain pattern from the In Good Taste designer series paper collection. Now, when you have the 12 by 12 sheet of paper, you can cut so that the planks are running vertically, or you can cut it so that the planks are running horizontally. Now, as you can see, I chose to cut my pieces so that the planks are running vertically. So each of these panels is going to be stuck onto the front of my card. So I'm just going to show you how to do that. Now, usually what I like to do is I will first align my piece with the front of my card like so. And then, holding it in place, I'll just carefully lift up the edge and I'll run a little bit of adhesive along the bottom. And then I'll just flip, lift, and I'll run some adhesive on either sides, along the center, and then along the edge. And then just press down firmly. So now what you can do is you can take a look to make sure that it's cut to exactly the same size. So even though, of course, we cut it to the same dimension, sometimes depending on your cut, it could be a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. So that's where I like to flip it open and just take a look, and you can see if there's any little bit showing, you can just very carefully trim that off, either using an X-Acto knife and ruler or just using your paper trimmer. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to my second piece, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim off any overhanging edges so that when somebody opens up the card, it's a nice clean edge. So I've gone ahead and I've stuck the panels down to the front of my card. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit of sponging around the edges using my Early Espresso Classic ink. The reason I want to do this is if you look at the sides of the paper, you'll notice it's white and against the cardstock, and that's because the paper has a white core. So I want to hide that, and to do that, I'm going to use some of my Early Espresso ink and a stamping sponge. So you can see here I have a wedge of stamping sponge. I'm just pinching it so that I have a little bit of a firmer surface. I'm going to dab it onto my ink pad, and then I'm simply going to just run it a little bit along the edge. Notice that I'm keeping my piece pretty much straight up and down, and that's because I don't really want the color extending too far onto my cardstock panel, because the ink is darker than the color of the pattern paper. So if I bring my sponge onto my pattern paper too much, you'll really see it show up against the pattern paper. Now if you like that look, that's totally fine, but for me the only reason I'm really doing this is, as I said, I just want to hide that white core from the paper. So as I get to the end here of my last side, you can see now that if I flip it this way, you don't notice that core as much. It's covered for the most part. Now if I wanted to, I could keep going back over it until it was completely covered. So for example here, I might just go back over it a few more times, but it's a lot less noticeable than it was before. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for my second card. So I've gone ahead and finished sponging around the edges of both of my note cards. So now I can go ahead and we can set that aside and we can work on creating this panel. Now I created this panel out of a 4 by 5 1/4 inch piece of Early Espresso cardstock, and I used this die from Stampin' Up's best plaid builder dies. As you can see, it's a 2-piece die set, and it's intended to help you create die cut plaid patterns, except I'm only going to be using one element of it. Now, if you don't have that die, that's fine. You can completely omit it, but I just prefer the effect that it gives. If you were to take a leaf that's sponge and you just sit it directly onto the wood panel, somehow it doesn't blend into the panel well. It just feels like, so from a design perspective, like it's sitting on top of this wood paneling, whereas by creating this extra panel on top, it kind of softens it and helps it helps the design flow together better. It kind of anchors it better onto the card. So that's why I have this. But again, if you don't have this die set, then just omit it. So what I'm going to do is, as I said, I'm going to die cut this out of Early Espresso cardstock. Now there's a couple ways that you can do this. So with these cards, I actually just, after I die cut it, I just used some double-sided adhesive on the back of each of the squares and I stuck it down to my card. But what I've noticed is that these little pieces have a tendency to catch on things and then fold upwards. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to have some double-sided adhesive on the back of my cardstock piece before I die cut it. Now to do that, so I've already gone ahead and added the double-sided adhesive to the back of my cardstock pieces, as you can see here. Now to do that, you can use Stampin' Up's adhesive sheets. So they do have these double-sided 6x12 adhesive sheets, which are very good. But I've actually recently started using these Stick-It sheets, which I just bought off of Amazon. And the reason I'm using these sheets is because this is repositionable, which turns into permanent. So with these ones, it's permanent. Once you stick it down, it's stuck. But for myself, I find that oftentimes I need to position and reposition die cuts before I get it exactly where I want it, especially when I'm trying to center something. So with this one, it's repositionable, which means I can lift and center without tearing my die cut piece or my paper underneath. But then after that, once I place it down, over time, the bond is going to become permanent. So this is the one I'm using, but this one works fine. Or as I said, if you don't have either, just use a normal double-sided adhesive. So I have here my platform for my die cutting machine. This is Stampin' Up's new machine. And I have the number 1 plate. I'm going to put then the number 2 plate. It's kind of nice. They give you the sandwiches. And then I have the number 3 plate that I use for my cutting. Now, in order to keep it from warping, you can see I've used it a lot. It's still nice and flat. You just want to make sure that as you use it, you basically flip it and then you also rotate it. So I'm going to place it down here. And then I'm going to place my die face up. Actually, hold on. I'm going to take the top piece. I'm placing my die face up on the top piece, and then I'm going to take my cardstock piece and I'm going to place it with the adhesive side facing me. And what I want to do is I want to center it in between these edges here and then this inner edge and this inner edge. So like so. And then I'm going to take some of my Scotch repositionable tape and I'm going to tape this in place, like so. Then I am going to take my other plate, place it on top, and then I'm just going to flip it like this. So now I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine. So I'm back from my die cutting machine, and now what we need to do is we need to get rid of all these little pieces that are on the inside of the die cut piece. So for that, I'm going to be using the brush tip of my Take Your Pick tool. Now when you order the brush tip, so you order it separately from the tool, it comes with these foam pads here. And then to use this tool, you would simply unscrew this putty tip and then you can put this in here. Now usually I don't bother unscrewing it, I'll just hold it. I mean, it has this little bit here that I can hold it, so that's generally what I will do. So now I'm going to remove this from my die, and then first I'm going to go pop out the squares, and I actually save the squares because you just never know, you can use them in another project. The other little pieces, of course, I'm not going to save those. And then so let's just get rid of this. Actually, I guess the tape pieces are going to come off anyways. So then you just take your brush tip and you can see if you just kind of rub it along your die cut piece, and I usually like to do it kind of along both sides, and you do want to kind of be careful. I mean, you don't want to bend or crease your piece, but you can see that if you rub this along your die cut piece, what it does is it helps pop out all those little die cut pieces. So you don't have to sit there. What I used to do before I had my tool was I'd sit there with my paper piercing tool and I would pop it out one at a time. So I'm just going to scrape these onto here for a sec and then basically continue on with my tool until I pop all these pieces out. So then once I've done that, I'm going to repeat this process with my second die cut piece. And then once I've done that, I will be back. So I've finished my second piece as well. And I just wanted to mention that you can also use this brush tip to clean your die. So you can see in my die, there's a lot of these pieces left too. So you can simply flip your die over on your on this foam pad, and then if you just run your brush tip over that, you can see that that also cleans all those pieces from the die. So if you have dies that are intricate like this little brush tip from the Take Your Pick tool is an awesome addition to your toolkit. So with both pieces die cut and cleaned, I'm now going to remove the backing and attach this onto my card front. So when you're removing the backing, it's very important that you do it slowly because these little pieces, especially where they're not attached, so you can see where the edge was cut off, they're very delicate and they can bend very easily. So I'm just using, you can always use like a paper piercing tool, or you can use the tip of your tweezers or the tip of your scissors to just kind of hold the cardstock down as you carefully peel the backing off. That will also keep you from getting your fingers stuck to your die cut piece. So I'm going to remove the backing, and then once the backing is completely off, we're going to center and stick this onto the front of our note card. So there you can see how that looks. So now I'm going to carefully lift that up, and I'm going to take my note card and then I'm going to flip this over and stick it down. Now to do that, I'm just going to stand up because it's a little bit easier for me to see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to very carefully position it in the center. And then when I'm happy, I'm going to slowly start sticking it down. And once I'm happy with the placement, I'm just going to go ahead and press that down. So there you can see how that looks, and I've already gone ahead and done the second one, so we're now ready to move on to our leaves. So I've gone ahead and die cut my leaves out of Whisper white cardstock. Now you could also use very vanilla cardstock, but I prefer to start with the pure white because then the color when you sponge on it is more true. Now I used, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the Stitched Leaves dies. And just to make it easy when I'm cutting, as you can see, using my Scotch repositionable tape, I basically stuck the inside of the die to the outside portion of the die. So when you die cut it, you get the outer edge cut, and then you get these, the veins are also die cut as well. And then by just having it stuck together like this, the inner and outer pieces held together with the tape, it just makes it easy when you need to die cut multiple pieces. So that's what I did. So now to add color with them, as I mentioned, I'm going to be doing an ink blending technique. So for my large leaf, let's start with that one. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab some of my repositionable tape or repositionable adhesive, and I'm just going to put a very tiny amount on my grid paper. Hopefully that's enough. And then for my blending, I'm going to be using a combination of ink blending brushes and sponge daubers. Now, you don't need to have the ink blending brushes. You could use, your options are ink blending brushes, sponge daubers, or of course you can use Stampin' sponges as well. I just find with these ink blending brushes, you get a much softer blend than you do. So it's easier to build color more delicately. Sometimes with the sponge dauber or with the Stampin' sponge, the color can get on there too quickly. And the other thing, because the edges of the sponge dauber and the Stampin' sponge are firmer, it's easier to accidentally catch the edges of your die cut pieces and and bend them. But it can be done, so don't feel like you have to get these blending brushes. Now these particular ones, the colored ones, are from Tailored Expressions, but you can get, I also own these ones here, and these are just makeup blending brushes, and I got these really inexpensively off of Amazon, and if you just type in makeup blending brushes, you can find them easily. So what I'm going to do for my leaf, I'm going to start with some of my Granny Apple Green. And actually we're going to do this leaf and we're going to do one of these long ones because one of these ones is also in that Granny Apple Green color. So I'm also going to take a little bit of my repositionable adhesive and stick that down. So basically I'm just touching my brush onto my ink pad and then I'm starting off my leaf. So I'm going in a circular motion and then I'm bringing that color onto my leaf. Now the reason you want to start off your leaf, because you see I ended up with that smoosh of ink there. Had I started on my leaf, I would have gotten that smoosh on the leaf itself. So I'm holding my brush kind of close to the head just so I can apply firmer pressure. If you want a lighter touch, hold it further down, and you can see these are fairly springy. So I'm going to start by building up color, and I'm starting with this particular leaf from the bottom going to the top because I want the color to be lightest at the top, and then afterwards we're going to be adding some other shades of green to this one. But for now I just want to build up the Granny Apple Green like so. And then what I'm going to do is with this one, actually I'll turn it sideways, I'm going to start down here too, and I'm going to bring my color up. Because I'd like it to be fairly vivid in the center of this leaf, like so. So I'm done. Probably have enough green on there for now, so we're going to close off the Granny Apple Green. And then let's finish off this leaf since we're still working with the greens right now. I'm now going to take some Old Olive and I'm going to take my same blending brush because you see here most of the color is gone even though my brush is stained. So I'm going to dab that into the Old Olive, and then starting off again, I'm going to bring the Old Olive up, but I'm only going to go about a little more than halfway. So basically I want about a third and a third and a third for the color. So where I really want the Old Olive to show is kind of in the center. So you can see it's lighter at the top. I've got the Old Olive in the center. And then the last color I'm going to use for the bottom is my Garden Green. So dipping there, starting off. And then as you can see, I'm bringing the color up just a little bit. So you can see how we've created this beautiful gradient effect. Now, actually I'll do that at the end. Okay, so we've got the green leaf done. So I'm going to set aside all my greens for now, and then I'm going to bring in some yellow. So I've got, for my next leaf, so you can see here for this tri-colored leaf, I used, let me grab my leaf here. I used crushed curry, and I forgot to grab my Daffodil Delight, so excuse my reach here. Crushed curry, Daffodil Delight, and then I have a little bit of pumpkin pie. So I'm going to start with, I've got my yellow brush. Again, I'm going to start at the bottom. I've got my Daffodil Delight. Actually, a little bit more. I'm moving to a clean area of my grid paper because I don't want, as I brush, it to reactivate any of my other colors and then muddy up my colors. So you can see I'm bringing up You don't always have to start from the bottom either. You could always now at this point, if you wanted to, kind of bring it down along the top, as long as you've dabbed off most of the ink here, for the lighter color anyways. Okay, so you can see we've got that one. So now I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to grab some crushed curry. And now, once again, as I did with the green leaf, I'm only going to bring it, I guess, 2/3 of the way up. So you can see I'm slowly building the color. And then let's bring in the pumpkin pie. And for that, I'm going to grab my orange brush. And then this one you can see, as I did with the darker green, I'm only kind of doing it along the bottom. And there we now have that leaf. And actually, let me bring back the crushed curry now and this leaf here. And this time, so I already have some color on the sponge dauber. As you can see, the sponge dauber holds the color more than the blending brushes do. So because I don't have a concentration of color, I haven't dabbed it on here, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to just go kind of in a circular motion near the center top of each of these leaves. So I'm circular, but then I'm also kind of going straight up and down and to blend it into the green below. But I'm keeping it white towards the tip. Now, if you're using a fresh sponge dauber, so you don't have ink sitting on yours like I did, then you just want to dab it lightly and then pounce off or blend it off on your grid paper before you bring it onto your leaf. Otherwise, see, so if you do this and then you were to just bring it off, you're going to end up with a circular thing. So what you do want to do is you just kind of want to work on blending it out a little bit. Just kind of soften the edges on your blender and then you can bring it onto your leaf. Now I added a little bit too much of the yellow, so I'm going to come back. Let me just go grab my Granny Apple Green. I have this big ink pile. You can see I dabbed it, so now I'm pouncing it off a little bit, and then I'm going to bring in that green. The sponge dauber allows me more control than the blending brush does because the surface area is smaller. You just have to take more care that you don't get the lines, and it also allows you to concentrate the color faster. So next step now is we're going to put this leaf aside, and I'm going to bring this one, and we're going to use the terracotta. So for this one, I actually used 3 different colors, and I just realized I forgot to grab this one. So this is the Calypso Coral. That's the one that I started with. So I'm just going to, as I did with the other ones, dab. And I'm not pressing down. With this color, as you can see, this is quite an intense color. So I'm not pressing down as firmly as I did with the other colors. Now, if you don't have all of these colors that I'm using, then just choose 2 colors, a lighter one and a darker one, because as you're seeing, I'm building up the color. So what you could do if you only have a lighter, like 2 shades, you don't have these 3 shades that you can work with, you just don't build the color up as much at the tip. So that's the Calypso Coral. Now let's bring in the terracotta tile. And I'm going to bring this one in as I did with all the others, 2/3 of the way up. And then the final color, Cajun Craze. This is an even stronger color, so again, you do want to pounce off, bring that color up. I'm not pressing down firmly. So some of the lighter colors I will press a little bit more firmly. When I get to like Cajun Craze, which is a very intense color, I'm not pressing down as much. So there you can see I've built up that gradient. So now for my big leaf, I'm going to start with a little bit of terracotta tile. So I just want to make sure my Cajun Craze is cleaned off. And I'm going to dip my brush in the terracotta tile, pounce off as I did before. And then I'm going to very slowly brush this over the edges. And with this, you can see a little goes a long way. And it gives that kind of beautiful pink tinge to the edge of your leaves, as though the leaves were starting to change color, which is what I'm starting to see where I live in my part of the world. So there you can see how that looks. And the beauty of this technique is that every single leaf is going to turn out different. So you can see with this one, my leaves are a little bit darker. This one I'm still going to add, I think, a tiny little bit of my early espresso, and we're going to do that for all our leaves. So let me grab a smaller blending brush. So this came in that set that I told you about that I bought off of Amazon, and that set, it was a set of 10 brushes, had a whole bunch of different sizes, which was awesome. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of early espresso around all the edges. So I'm going to dab this, and again, this is a strong color, so you can see that. So you don't want a lot of that color, and I'm just going to very carefully, I don't want to brush in too far, because then otherwise my leaves will end up too brown. But what this does in darkening the edges like this, it's going to, first of all, look a little bit more natural, and it's going to help it flow. It's going to make it look, the design, like from a design perspective, more harmonious on the card, because we're introducing a little bit of that brown color into the leaf. So there you can see. So this is an example of a leaf that has a little bit of brown, and then here a leaf that has no brown. So when you're doing this, if this is a new technique for you, then what I would recommend is die cut more leaves than you think you're going to need and practice. So because you're not going to get it right the first time, most likely. If you've never done this technique before, you may end up with too much. That's usually the most common thing, is that you end up with too much color on your leaves. So have a few extra so you don't have to go die cutting when you're in the middle of your project. So as you can see, I'm just applying a fairly small amount. So I'm barely brushing onto the edge of my leaf. But there you can see the difference between the side that has the color and the side that doesn't. There you go. And then let's add a little bit of this around the edges of this leaf as well. So there you can see we're now done our leaves. So our next step is to die cut our words. So now it's time to die cut our words. So as you can see here, for one card I have thanks, for one card I have welcome. Now welcome is just flat. Thanks, you can hopefully see here if you look from the side, I have mounted onto this foam. So I'm going to be die cutting it out of my copper foil sheet. The welcome, so both dies, the welcome and the thanks, come from the well-written dies, and the welcome I'm simply going to just die cut out of this copper foil. However, for the thanks, what I'm going to do is I'm first going to mount the copper foil onto this double-sided foam adhesive sheet. Now these are Stampin' Up's new foam adhesive sheets, so this is the size that they come in. which is about 4¼ by 4¼ inches. And I simply cut a little strip. I just made sure it was just big enough for my thanks. And I'm going to peel off one side, and then I'm going to take my foil. Actually, maybe I'll flip my foil over. That might be the easiest way to do this. And then I'm going to stick this to my foil like so. And then I'm just going to trim this piece like so. And now I'm going to take my thanks and I'm just going to sit it on top of that. And as you can see, I deliberately cut it so that it's a fairly tight fit, just so that I don't waste a lot of my foam sheet. So just to keep my die from sliding as I'm die cutting, I'm taking a piece of my Scotch tape. And this is that removable tape. I'll show you which one it is. It's this one here, the Scotch. It's the removable one, and I buy it in the rolls and have it on a tape dispenser. And so now I'm going to take this and I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine. I'll also die cut the welcome at the same time, and then once I've done that, I will be back. So I'm back from my die cutting machine. Now the tape does have a tendency, so you can see here I'm peeling off the tape, but it does have a tendency to rip. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see it actually, but over here, over top of the letters, it ripped a little bit. So I just want to make sure it's easier for me to peel that off right now versus doing it later once I've popped this out of the die. So I'm just taking the tip of a paper piercing tool and I'm using that to pull the tape off. Now I'm hoping that maybe once Stampin' Up! Actually the centerpiece doesn't matter, once Stampin' Up! Has their magnetic sheets available, that it will be easier for me to, maybe I won't have to use this tape. Now when you're, so I'm not going to make you watch me do that on camera, but when you're popping this out, you're going to notice that the backing is going to want to have a tendency to come off. So just watch as you pop it out. As much as possible, try to keep the backing attached to it, because otherwise it just gets a little bit challenging to maneuver. So I'm using my paper piercing tool to just kind of help me pop this away from the die. So you can see I'm trying to kind of stick the backing back on just so it's easier to maneuver. And then still you can see I'm going to have to pop out these little center pieces here. So I won't make you watch that. I'm going to leave this in the die until I'm ready to use it. And then here is my welcome piece that you see. So now we're going to stick everything down to our card. So let's start with the 3 leaves, because that's probably the easiest one to do. I'm going to position them where I want them on my card. So because I centered my die cut on, or my cardstock onto this plaid builder die, I can use this center square as my center mark. So I'm going to stick my yellow leaf there in the center, then my green leaf, and then my red leaf. Now I want to give them some dimensions, so for that I'm going to be using some Stampin' Dimensionals. So I'm just going to put 3 Stampin' Dimensionals on the back of every single one of my leaves. And then what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to remove the backing and stick them down. So I've removed the backing from all my leaves, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my center leaf. And as I said, I'm using this center line as my guide, and I want to stick it so that it's probably about 3/4 of an inch down from the top. So if I use my grid lines as a guide, yep, it's 3/4 of an inch. Now I'm not pressing it down yet, just so that if I need to, I can move them. Now this leaf I'm going to stick fairly close, so you can see the edge of my leaf is about at the inner edge of this second kind of area of squares. And then this green leaf is again aligned in a similar way, like so. Then when you're happy with the placement, you can press it down. Now for the welcome, I'm going to see, oh, there's my tweezers. I'm going to be sticking that down with some Tombow Mono Multi-Liquid Glue. Now theoretically I could have used one of my adhesive sheets, and I probably should have. I just did not think of it. So I'm going to use this glue. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a very tiny, so I'm barely squeezing my bottle, and I'm just adding little dabs of glue to the back, and then you can, without squeezing, you can kind of use the tip of this to spread it around a little bit. And then if you're worried about it still being in lumps that it might squish out, you can always take a piece of paper of some kind and just kind of touch it to that to get rid of any excess glue. And then now I'm going to lay it across the bottom of my leaves like so. So I'm centering it like that. And then the last thing that I want for this card before we're done this one is I'm using my Champagne Rhinestone Basic Jewels. Now what's cool about these jewels is I find they're fabulous for autumn. Even though they're a champagne color, when you look at it on this card, it almost takes on a bit of a coppery tint rather than that sort of pinky color that they look like when they're on the sheet here. So I've been using these ones for my fall project. So I'm going to put 2 down here, and then I'm going to take, so a large and a medium, and then I'm going to take a smaller one, and I'm just going to put it over there. Now if you want to add a few more rhinestones, of course you can do so. I might spread these out just a little more. But I'm just going to keep it with my 3 rhinestones. So there you can see that card is done. So now for this card, what I'm going to do is, you can see I have here some patterned paper strips, and these come from the, which collection is it? The Regals, I think. Yeah, the Regals patterned paper, so the Regals DSP. And I chose this pattern out of Cajun Craze, so it's wood grain on one side and it's text on the other one, and then out of Old Olive, it's this kind of distressed pattern on one side and the circles on the other. This one is 3/4 of an inch by 3 inch. This one is 1/2 inch by 3 1/8 of an inch. So basically, I'm just going to take some of my double-sided adhesive, and I'm going to place some along the bottom of this Cajun Craze piece. And then I'm going to place this piece onto my grid paper here. I want to align the right edges. I want it to be about 1/8 of an inch up from the bottom edge. And I'm just visually aligning it, and then I'm going to stick it down. So you can see the green overlaps slightly below that one. Now I'm going to take this and I want to stick it onto my card so that it's, I think about 1 inch up from the bottom. Yep, about 1 inch up from the bottom. So I'm going to take some more of my double-sided adhesive, and then again, using my grid lines as a guide, I want to align it with the right edge of my card. Now, because it's not stretching all the way across, what I do sometimes find helpful is to take a ruler and then just to make sure that I have aligned this straight. And I didn't quite, it was a little bit too high on one side, so I can fix it like so, but that means actually I need to shift it down a little bit. Kind of hard to see without sticking my head in the camera. So now I can go ahead and I can stick my leaf down. So for that, I'm just going to use my liquid glue, and I'm going to place some in the center. Always place my liquid glue in the center just to keep it from squishing out. And then I want it to overlap, the stem to overlap, and then the tip of the leaf to just basically come up to the edge like so. So now I can take my thanks and finish fiddling with that. So I'm going to just poke it out of the die. So now I've finished pulling off all the backing and poking out all the pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and stick this down. Now the only thing is that for whatever reason this time it was a little bit more stuck, and so the thanks ended up a little bit more chewed up. So I have 2 options. I could either stick a flat thanks like this, or you can continue with this popped up one. But what you can do, so if that happens, you've added your foam and it's gotten kind of chewed up, looks like my dog got a hold of it actually, you can stick it down and then you can place some glue on top of a second thanks piece and then stick it directly on top of that, like so. So we can probably try that because I do like it popped up. So let's add a little bit of glue. And if I really don't like it, I'll just pull it off because I haven't pressed it down firmly. I'll just pull it off and we'll just do it flat. So there you can see, now that I've stuck this second thanks down, you can't even tell that it was chewed up. It looks really pretty. So now you may be wondering, why didn't I just die cut the thanks out of the foam and the cardstock separately and then stick them down together? Well, the reason for that is because the adhesive on the foam is actually super sticky and it's really a one-shot deal. So if you don't get your word aligned perfectly on top of that foam, you're going to rip it pulling it off. So in this case, though, because I was sticking the word on top of another cardstock piece, and because I was using a liquid glue, I could fidget with it and fiddle with it until I got it perfectly aligned. So even though it got kind of chewed up, I was still able to recover it. And that's not going to happen every single time. Like when I did this card here, the first one, I had no issues. I didn't have to do a second die cut piece on top of the thanks. For whatever reason, this time the foam just stuck in the die a lot more and it just chewed up the cardstock more when I was trying to take it out. But either way, you can see here's a quick fix if that happens to you. So the last step for this card now is to add some rhinestones. And once again, I'm going to use these champagne rhinestones. And I'm going to put one kind of slightly overlapping over here. That's the large. And then I'm going to take the medium and I'm going to put one here, and I'm going to put one here, I think, like so. So there you have it, friends. You can see how we created these cards. You can see that there's a lot of different techniques involved, a lot of different tips. It's kind of fidgety and fiddly. I didn't edit a lot of that out because I just wanted you to see that this is sometimes what it's like when you're working with something that's very fidgety. So I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. I hope you picked up a lot of tips, tricks, and techniques, and I look forward to seeing you in next month's exclusive tutorial.